This is not an easy path. The moment you start trying to become a little bit more aware, a little bit more conscious, you realize that ignorance is a lot more blissful, right? It's a lot easier to just, prance around, right? Once you start getting into this process and you start observing yourself and you start observing what happens and you start, becoming more cognizant and more conscious and more aware, you cannot unlearn that. Now you're in the path, and it's a difficult path. It's a challenging path.
Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today it is my pleasure to have Rafael Andrade with us. After 24 years working as an engineer in corporate America, Rafael started a company to help people feel and live better. It's been a process of growth and humility. Rafael learned that we must constantly unlearn what no longer serves humanity, relearn what has changed, and learn challenging new concepts. Today, he lives a life of discovery and sharing. Rafael, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Stephan.
So I would love to first start off with your origin story of how you became interested in up-leveling, improving one's life. And, you were in corporate America, probably doing pretty well. So it must have been some sort of epiphany or transformational shift that took you in a different direction. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, absolutely. There was actually a couple of things that all came in sequence that, for lack of a better term, woke me up to having to observe a little bit more what I was doing. So yes, I was doing well in corporate America. I was traveling the world. My family, I had a family with kids, a wonderful wife at the time, and but I was traveling a lot all over the world. I wasn't very healthy. So there's two events that happened. One of them is a friend of mine gave me a book that was very influential for me. It was a Synchrodestiny by Deepak Chopra, and it was a very interesting book. It pointed out a number of things that I wasn't paying attention. And soon after, I was diagnosed with a heart condition. So you get a book that opens your eyes in certain aspects of your life, and then you get a diagnosis, and you look at your life around, and you look that I was missing a lot from my children's lives, so I wasn't ready to leave corporate America, but I started looking at other things to potentially do, and as I was looking around, then a third event took place, which is actually, to my surprise, and as a big dagger to my ego, I got laid off after, being a top performer. So that, to me, I took that as a sign, for lack of a better term, that I needed to do something different. Up to that point, I've already been looking at what else to do, and I knew I wanted to do something in the field of health, in the field of doing better. My father is a physician, still practicing, and my mother was an educator. She is retired, and I felt that there was something that could be done within the medical field, within medicine, within helping people prevent disease instead of treating disease. So I started looking at things all the way from ancient wisdom to modern technology. And I am an engineer. I like technology. I like science. I am a student of science. I need to see things. I don't necessarily want to say that I don't believe in the unseen, but when it comes to taking care of oneself, I need to be able to see results. So I took those two together, talked to people that I trusted, and embarked on this journey, learning about technologies that can help people be a little bit more resilient to disease and to things that slow us down and that honestly age us.
So what would be some of the modalities that you work with personally that you recommend to your clients in terms of things that make them resilient to disease, that help them tap into ancient wisdom?
When I first got involved, there were three modalities. Obviously, nutrition is a big part of who we are and what we can and can't do, right? And I there's so much information about nutrition that's out there that I didn't want to do something, be another Me Too. So I didn't, although nutrition is a big part of my life, I didn't focus on that as part of something that I needed to explore as an offering to people around me. So I actually focused on three initially, three basic modalities. One of them was our breathing process. When you do the research about how our breathing process works, it is pretty obvious that we don't breathe properly and that we don't oxygenate properly, our bodies. We are born very good breathers, but over time, as we, somewhere around the age of 4 to 5, when we start going to school and we start sitting around long time, uh, we start wearing, tighter and tighter clothes, we forget the process of breathing. So I got introduced to the technology of hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and I was fascinated by the process. Obviously there are modalities within the domain of hyperbarics that are FDA approved, and there are some that are not. There are some that are specific for disease, and there are some that are more for longevity and prevention. And depending on who you talk to, some of the science is proven or not, right? So I was intrigued by it, so I started trying it on my own. So I have my own hyperbaric oxygen chamber. I use it every day uh, for an hour a day, and I started seeing changes within myself. In addition to that, sauna therapy, infrared sauna therapy, um, was also something that I was very intrigued by. Uh, Sauna therapy has been around for a very long time. The Scandinavians have been using some sort of sauna technology, whether it's from natural sources or not, throughout for quite a bit of time. And so I embarked in that, studied, learned, ended up with my own sauna, and use it as part of my daily routine as well for sweat therapy. And the last one was low level light therapy, red and infrared low level light therapy. There's a number of products in the market that are well known. So I started exploring in that and seeing how I can use that to improve areas in my body that have either past injuries or aches and pains. And again, I was doing things in parallel. On one hand, I was studying. I was talking to experts, talking to people, doing my own studying, and then I was using it on myself and taking notes and seeing how I was feeling and how my body was responding to these things. It was phenomenal, and it's been phenomenal. It's been at least 6 years that I've been using those three modalities as part of my life. I have a routine every morning that I wake up and I get into a chamber, then I get into the sauna. That's when I listen to all my podcasts and get into my conference calls, and then I use light therapy throughout the day, and then I use breath work also throughout the day. And the results have been, for me, I feel better than I felt. I'm 51 now. I feel better than I felt in a very long time, and I sleep better, and I'm able to do things now that I wasn't able to do in the past 20 years.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, congratulations. I'm curious to hear what the technology, the brand of what the device you're using for the low level light therapy. What is that?
Right now, I use a product from a company called LS Pro Systems. It just happens to be one that I'm familiar with, and they have a webpage, lsprosystems.com. There are many others in the market. It is just the one that I acquired a while back, and I've just kept it. And it's basically these pads. There are different modalities. There are very large systems that like Juve. They're very famous, very popular. It's a thing that you actually install on a wall and you stand in front of it, right? Because the light needs to penetrate the skin, so you have to stand in front of it with no clothes and for 5-10 minutes. There are light therapy beds. There are companies that do those light therapy beds, Elevate Health. There's a number of companies out there. I wasn't very interested in bigger system. I was interested in more in portable things that I could, put on me while I'm driving or while I'm in my zero gravity chair or when I'm, working. So these are more like pads that you can just put underneath, in areas, lower back, around the heart, and you immediately feel once it's in contact with your skin, you immediately feel the two things that happen. Blood flow increases in the area, and you can feel the blood flow increase. And if you have some pain, most people report that the pain in the area gets reduced. And that makes a lot of sense because the light therapy, what it does is as a part of the process of increasing blood flow, inflammation tends to go down in the area. And when inflammation goes down, all kinds of good things happen. Right? When inflammation goes up, all kinds of bad things happen. So it's an interesting process how the body uses that light, red and infrared, to improve quality of life.
Yeah, got it. How long are you in the infrared sauna for each day?
60 minutes.
So you're doing an hour in the hyperbaric oxygen chamber and another hour in the sauna.
That is correct. Yeah. I get up really early. I get up, between 5:30 and 6.
Do you get much sleep?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I actually fall asleep in the chamber because you lay down, right? So I tend to do my meditations in there. So I put my noise canceling headphones, and I use Sam Harris's meditation app. I guess the purists will argue that I'm not really doing a lot of meditating if I fall asleep, but which is right. But it works. Going through the meditation, and when the meditation is over, that's when I'm listening to again. I have like up to 2 hours of potentially listening to podcasts or answering emails or a variety of things, because you can bring your electronics in these two devices, so you can actually have conference calls if you need to. I don't just sit there. I tend to be somewhat productive while I'm in there.
Zoom calls?
No Zoom calls. Only voice.
So can you do breath work while inside the hyperbaric oxygen, where or that's two very different modalities? You do that once you're out?
No, there's nothing that says you can't. In fact, my friend Charlie Engel, a common friend of ours, he one of the trips here to Lake Nona, he usually when he's here, he stays with me because he likes to use the chamber and he likes to use the stuff that I have. And he asked me that, and I'm like, you know what, I don't know that there's anything wrong with that. So he goes in there and does his breath work, and I've done it myself too. I can't say that it works better or less. It just feels good.
Yeah. How did you meet Charlie, by the way? He's an amazing person, amazing soul.
Oh yeah, I met Charlie through a common friend, Gloria Caulfield, here, from Tavistock. There's an event that happens here every year, the Impact Forum, and he was a speaker at the event. This was before COVID. One of the evening galas where people are mingling and talking, we just started talking. He he has an aura about him. He was very different than everybody else. Was all dressed up in suits and ties, and he walks in with his running shoes and his jeans and a t-shirt. And I'm like, I need to talk to this guy. So we started talking. We hit it off. We exchanged phone numbers, and then within a week, I received a signed copy of his book, and we've been friends ever since. A very good friend.
Yeah, he's great. Amazing person, and wow, what a high performer too. The kinds of things that he's accomplished and is in process of accomplishment. It's outstanding. He's an ultra runner, and I won't spend too much time on. I'm going to try and get him on this podcast, so we'll get to hear much more from him directly. But yeah, he's a great human. So, do you do any kind of cardio with things like running or cycling or anything like that?
I used to do a bit of running. What I've gotten into lately is more of tennis. It's something that allows me to move a bit more. Being here in Lake Nona is so easy because the USDA is literally 2 minutes away. So I took tennis lessons a while back when my kids were playing tennis, just so that I could play with them. And it seemed like it was a good sport, especially singles, where you can get a pretty good workout in a very short amount of time. So I have started jogging again. If I'm not careful, I can hurt my lower back, so I have to do it I have to take it easy. But tennis is what I've been doing 3 to 4 times a week now, and it's what's helping me keep that heart rate up. Yeah, no, so it's between those two, between jogging and tennis, are things I don't do either competitively. right? It's just more of a thing to do that helps me with my movement. What I would say though is one of the things that I do in order to that I do regularly is to, I have a business partner that is a movement specialist and connective tissue specialist that has taught me a lot about how to properly do whatever activity you choose to do. And that's been a cornerstone, in my routine is to do, is to unlearn bad habits of, how we sit, and how our shoulders sit and how, in our pelvis, which is a very ignored bone. A lot of people don't know that the pelvis is supposed to move in multiple axes, right? That it has actually multiple axes of rotation, and that actually is not just one bone, that it actually, opens up. And according to some people, most problems begin with lack of mobility of the pelvis. Because, northbound, you have the spine, that sits in it. And then southbound, you have the two legs, right? The two femur heads. So I do a fair amount of focus movement therapy that involves a lot of yoga style moves where I open up the pelvis by doing stretches of different kinds. And I find that when you do those, I am actually able to then go on a court or go running and move with a bit more ease, with a bit with less restriction. So I've made that also part of my. In fact, that's what I do once I get out of the sauna, that I'm hot, ready to move. Is a lot of these. I have a routine. It's about a 15-20 minute routine to get the body to open up, get the joints, to open up, get the pelvis to open up, and get the chest to open up. Without that, my workouts are not as effective.
Yeah, makes sense. Are you doing a particular kind of breath work process, like fire breath or any, like I don't remember what these kinds of breathing exercises are that are part of yoga. Do you do anything yoga specific with breath work, or you do kind of the hyperventilating thing, or what's that called when you basically try to get DMT to get produced inside of your brain, and you might have a spiritual experience from that. I had Curtis Thomas on this podcast, who's an expert on that, and that was great. So I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yes and no. Yes and no. I don't do the breath work that I do regularly is just standard box breathing that I do to slow myself down or to pick myself up.
So box breathing, that would be the same number of seconds for the in breath, and then the hold, and then for the out breath, and then repeat.
Correct. But what I do is if I'm trying to slow myself down, then the intake is longer than the exhale. And if I'm trying to pick myself up, then I reverse that, with the holds in between. So the box actually changes shape, if you will. However, an acquaintance here that does cold plunges. They have the tubs with the cold plunges, and I've been fascinated by that. He's teaching me how to. I've done it twice already in the past couple of weeks, and his preparation. He was trained with the Wim Hof method. So what he does is you have to take 20 minutes of this type of fire kind of breathing, before you begin, so that when you go into the ice water, you use that to regulate your temperature and be able to withstand the 2, 3, 4, however many minutes you can withstand in the cold water. So it's not something that I do every day or every week, but it's part of the routine that you have to do before you get into the cold plunge. So I'm going to do it again this weekend.
Oh, good for you. I've done it just twice. It was awful.
It can be. I tell you what, it's especially hard on the feet and the hands, right? But I tell you what, the breathing is essential. You have to get into that breathing mode, so those 10, 20 minutes before you get in order to be able to then, because you get the body prepped for it, and then you're doing the breath work while you're in the water. So that actually, for me, as I said, without that, I think it will be pretty awful as well for me.
Yeah. So where does the Sam Harris Waking Up app fit into all this? Because I have the app, I pay for it, I never use it. I loved the little stories or kind of meditation stories. I don't know what he calls them. They're not like, okay, here you're going to breathe in and here's a visualization or whatever. He's just talking. And one of them was quite profound in particular that Joe Polish, the head of Genius Network, played before one of or at the beginning of one of the monthly meetings. And what a way to start the meeting. He talked about, Sam Harris in the recording talked about death. And it was quite profound. It was about 6 minutes, and boy, it set a very different tone for that meeting than most. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna subscribe to the app, and I never got around to listening to many more of those recordings. But so I'm curious to hear what you're using the Waking Up app for, how regularly you use it, what are maybe some epiphanies you've had from using it.
Yes, absolutely. I'm a big fan of Sam Harris. I think he's doing some incredible things, not only from the neuroscience point of view, but from also some of this ancient wisdom of meditation and transcendence. I'm a student of those two. I tried a number of different types of meditations before, with mantras and with sounds, and I found out I wasn't getting what I thought I was supposed to get, and I think that in itself is a problem because a lot of people go into meditation with an expectation that certain things are supposed to happen. If I look back in retrospect, I probably could benefit from those other types of meditations now that I've been introduced to mindfulness meditation, which is, I mean, obviously Sam is not the only one who does this, but I found out through him about mindfulness meditation, and to me, that is a process that works best because I can actually take that meditative approach throughout my day-to-day life, not just when I'm trying to meditate. And so for me to explain, for those who are listening that may not know, at least the way I understand it is the way that he guides you through meditation is through the process of self-observation, right? Is this idea that your thoughts they're not yours. They're just coming and going through the compass of your mind. The moment you accept that your thoughts are not your thoughts, that you observe them, that your feelings are not your feelings, you observe them, that your emotions are not your emotions, but you instead observe them. Is this idea that you get a cold, you don't become the cold. You are a human experiencing a cold, right? So if you can take that analogy and apply it to thoughts, feelings, emotions, then you can become the third party observer of the thoughts. So his meditation app, it's very unique because there's a lot of silence. He says something, he guides you through a process of observation, like, focus on something in the room or think about someone you love, right? All of those things are thoughts that are coming and going, right? And inevitably what happens is your mind wanders into yesterday's meeting or at an argument that you had with somebody, the day before, and then he brings you back in. Okay, if your mind wanders, get back and observe this one thought or this one thing that's hanging on the wall or this one feeling that you have for someone. And it is that process of focusing on a thought, falling off the wagon, because that's what the brain's going to do. This idea that of the quieting of the mind, I'm learning that it's an impossibility. The mind is not meant to be quiet. It's not what it does. It's always going. But it is this process of focus on something. You're going to fall off the wagon, bring yourself back, and then you're going to fall off and bring yourself back. And you keep doing this, on and on throughout the meditation. I find that for me, I can do that all day. If I can incorporate that into, when I'm in a meeting or when I'm in on the streets or driving, that I tend to not react to the world. I tend to have less buttons for people to push, right? I tend to be more present. It's not that, buttons don't get pushed and some, of course, we're human, but it's this idea of this training of oneself to observe the thought, but not indulge in it, right? Or to observe the thought and quantify, is this thought useful to me? Is this something that I can use for good, or is this something that is destructive to me? And then through that process, I can then either use it or dismiss it and just watch it disappear as it inevitably happens. Thoughts come and go. So for me, his app it's challenging because it is difficult to get into this mode because we're going, and we're taught by society that we need to be on all the time. But it has taught me how to observe my inner self as a third party. And again, I tend to use a lot of analogies. We tend to be really good at fixing other people's problems because we can see what's happening, right? Well, because we're a third party, we can observe from a distance what's happening. The meditations that I've learned, through Sam, I feel like I'm doing the same with myself. Like I'm putting myself as a third party observer of my thoughts and feelings and emotions, and then be able to not judge them, just observe them, and then take them for what they are. They are there for me to either use or to observe them walk away. So he has this thing that every day he has the meditation of the day, right? So I just, and you do it for 10 or 20 minutes. So I do the 20 minutes and I put it on, and I just follow the guidance. But like I said, it's challenging because there's uh, a lot of gaps of nothingness, right? He tells you to do something and then there's quiet. And then you forget that you're meditating because, again, the mind goes and does all kinds of weird things. But then he brings you back. And it's that process of bringing you back, that, at least for me, it helps me uh, be a less reactive human and a more present human.
When I was in India on a platinum partner trip of Tony Robbins, he brought in some oneness monks, and one of the things they taught that was really profound for me is that you're not your body, you're not your thoughts, you are a receiver of thoughts like an FM um, tuner. And so if you take that on board, you're much less likely to get uh, triggered or indulge in the thoughts that are not helpful or not kind of the light, because you just recognize, oh, that's not mine, and then I send it to the light. I do that pretty regularly because it's a hygiene thing, a spiritual energetic hygiene. Thought is not mine. That's a a weird envious thought about whatever, and I'm just gonna send it and wherever it originated from to the light.
It makes sense, but it's so difficult to implement and to do because we're not trained that way. Our society, especially in the Western world, we're not. We're taught that we have a self, and we're taught that we are, there's this duality of life, and independent of what people, whether you're on one side of the fence or the other side of the fence on that, the ego gets involved and say, no, these are my thoughts, this is who I am, these are my feelings, I feel this. And it is very difficult for me to, when something bad happens, to not fall right into that, right? Because it seems like we're wired to think that way. And, through this practice, right? Meditation is a practice. It's something that you do every day. It's not something that you get anything out of. It's something that you do in order to deal with, the myriad of inputs that are coming, at us. It's not like I tell my close friends and my family, this is not an easy path. The moment you start trying to become a little bit more aware, a little bit more conscious, you realize that ignorance is a lot more blissful, right? It's a lot easier to just, prance around, right? Once you start getting into this process and you start observing yourself and you start observing what happens and you start, becoming more cognizant and more conscious and more aware, you cannot unlearn that. Now you're in the path, and it's a difficult path. It's a challenging path.
It's the red pill.
Exactly, exactly. It is in that challenge. It is in that path, that the growth happens, And what I like about Sam is that he brings that neuroscience aspect to it, with his other work, and that we're living in very difficult times. We're living in such difficult times. Our brains it took about what 3 million years for us to get the brain that we have from our ancestors, that when they first started consuming a lot of protein, animal protein, right? And when you look at that timeline, and it was 10,000 years when the agricultural revolution started, right? Okay. And then just the last 50 years, our lives have changed so dramatically, and our brain is not just developing new areas of cognition to deal with new social problems. Our brain is just using the stuff that was developed, you know, thousands of years ago to deal with something that is brand new, like social media, bullying, etc., etc. The pressure of an economy, inflation, recessions, right? Corporate, pressures, the workplace, long hours, all this stuff. If you're not taking the time to unplug and observe those thoughts, those feelings, those emotions, those moods, right? No wonder while mental health is a global problem today, because our brain is not prepared, to deal with all of that. It's learning as it goes. And I tell my kids, I have three 23, 21, and a 19-year-old. I tell them, they ask me, why are you doing all this? It's like, well, because it is the only thing I've found, this meaning, the meditation and, and the routine that I do is the only thing that I found that allows me to then get out the door and tackle the world without it tackling me, right? It is the only thing that I've found so far. And I'm prepared to find out tomorrow that it's all wrong and that I have to go and do something else. Fine, I'm ready. Let's do this, right? It is the only thing so far that I found is this neuroscience, merger with ancient wisdom, and finding routines that bring the two of them together, so that I'm not out there just reacting to every impulse and every input that's inevitably going to come to me, right? And I feel bad. I mean, I don't know what love your perspective on this, since you've been to India. I've never had the opportunity, but I don't subscribe to this idea that the younger generation has it any easier than the oldest. I think actually it's the other way around. The younger folks that are born today with the same brain that our grandparents were born, the exact same brain, they're dealing with problems that our grandparents never had to. They're dealing with social media. They're dealing with this image. With this globalization. What's happening in Ukraine instantly. What's happening in Africa. What's happening. This amount of stimulus.
Yes, and it's all bad news, pretty much.
Exactly, and the manipulation, right? Our grandparents didn't have to deal with that. Yeah, maybe they worked a lot harder physically because they worked on a farm, or they had jobs that were. But when they got home, it was quiet. There was not this constant fight for your attention, this war to get your attention, to look over here. No, look over here, look over here, this app and TikTok and this and that. The brain can't deal with that elegantly. And it's going to take evolution a while before it catches up on how to do that. So I feel very, very passionately that these things that we're talking about now, the meditation, the giving the body, using tools that give the body resilience, or whatever those tools may be, is an absolute necessity in today's world. And it's a necessity for our young people, because they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know that they're being manipulated, either directly or indirectly, by the society that surrounds us.
Yes, and the tools that they use on a daily basis. Yeah. Now, something that I think is a very powerful thought experiment, which I'd invite you to try on, is if this world and all of reality is an illusion, not necessarily a simulation created by superhumans like Elon Musk might think, but more like an illusion such as you might learn about in Kabbalah or in Hinduism or Buddhism. And in Hinduism, they refer to these illusory world as Maya, and in Buddhism, samsara. So if that's the case, that this is all an illusion, the only thing real here is love, God. And if that is the case, then let's take evolution and how long it takes for the brain to evolve. Like you said, could be hundreds of thousands of years before there's a significant change in the way the human brain works. Well, what if you don't have that going on? It's more like it's a computer program of sorts, but the angels, God, they're manipulating the script to your movie, in real time. And if they do that, then they can also put into your movie script or your simulation that this thing looked like it took millions of years to develop. And the book I'm reading that alludes to this is called Kabbalah and the Age of the Universe. And it's by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, and it's fascinating to think that and I've had so many glitches in the matrix that it's become very clear to me that, at least, from my perspective, and I'm not going to try and push my perspective on anyone else, but from my perspective, this is an illusion. And these things that happen to me, they defy logic and the laws of physics and so forth. They are like the glitch in the Matrix in the movie where, hey, I just saw that scene. I just saw that cat do the exact same thing twice. That's really weird. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I am open to the idea. I think so tell you where I'm at. I mean, I am in on the bandwagon of we are in an illusion, in the sense of what neuroscience says. When you look at how our brain works, right, and how our senses get translated into electrical stimuli, in the brain. The brain is a very dark place. There's nothing going on. It's not like it sees through the eyes. No, it doesn't see. It's just the eyes take whatever is out there and it interprets it into electrical signals, and then the brain does its thing.
Yeah, the skull is a dark cave.
It is a very dark cave. No light gets in there. There's not light in there, right? So the idea is a great book, A Thousand Brains by Jeff Hawkins, that talks about, this idea of creating a model of the world, right? That's what the brain does, right? It creates a model of the world, and then it's constantly updating that model. Well, if that is true, that model is being built directly from the senses that we have as humans. And we have eyes, and noses and ears and so forth, right? Well, what about the rest of the animal kingdom? They have different senses, right? There are animals that have much better eyes. There are animals that have other senses that we don't have. There are animals that see farther in an electromagnetic spectrum of light, right? There are others that hear more, smell more. There are animals like sharks that have an electromagnetic field that they can sense things through electromagnetic. So when their brains take all that input, it creates a model of the world. Well, that model of the world is very different than our model of the world, and the model of the world of dogs, and the model of the world of birds, the model of the world of every other living sentient thing. So the only thing we can agree, right, is that we have one view of what we consider real. Everything else, and even as you and I, right, we know we have, as humans, the best thing we can do is agree. We can be subjective that the backdrop to where you are is green. Right now, I see you, and it's green. Because we've been.
It won't be in the final video because my editors will do their magic.
Right, but all we can agree is that what we call green, we agree that is green. But how do you define green? Right. So when you put all that together, it's evident to me that we are in an illusion that is constructed by our brain, and that is constantly changing. Now, that's like the starting point. And then to take it to the level of what you explained, I have had discussions, with folks about that, and I'm open to that possibility, right? That there is more, because I think when you start paying attention, you start seeing more of these glitches, right? And that's if you get trapped by the hamster wheel of the everyday, gotta work, gotta do this, gotta go work out, gotta feed the kids, gotta take them to the soccer game, gotta do this, gotta do that. What happens is you don't observe. You cease to be the observer of what's happening. But the moment you get into any kind of these practices, whichever they may be, and you start observing, you start seeing patterns. Um, and it is very easy for our mind to say, well, who's creating the patterns? Is there something creating these patterns? Am I supposed to be observing? So I'm totally open to the possibility of what you just described. That there's yet another level of illusion beyond the biological, what neuroscience teaches us, because it is easy to see that once you start seeing, observing, truly observing what's happening around us.
If this is a rabbit hole you're interested in going down, I have a number of episodes that you can listen to while you're in your hyperbaric oxygen chamber on psychic phenomenon and paranormal stuff that I think will be quite interesting for you, like Tina Zion and Sheila Gillette and Mark Nelson, Paul Selig. These are phenomenal, absolutely legit psychics, mediums who are very gifted. And yeah, we're all psychic, but we don't believe it, so we shut it out. And yeah, a great book as an example on how to develop this is called A Still Small Voice, A Psychic's Guide to Awakening Intuition. It's by Echo Bodine. And actually, by the time this episode airs, my interview with Echo will be live as well. So that'd be another great one for the listener. Yeah, you Rafael won't be able to access it yet because it's not public. It's not been published yet. But yeah, it's an incredible gift that we have to develop if we choose to go beyond the seen world into the unseen world, which is actually more real than the seen world. It's been awesome and awe-inspiring to explore this over the last couple of years. If you're interested in going down that rabbit hole, I have a number of phenomenal guests who are totally legit in the realm of psychic abilities and paranormal phenomenon. Like, for example, Mark Nelson, Sheila Gillette, Paul Selig, Sam the Illusionist. Yeah, just amazing. And I'll echo Bodine. By the time this episode, this interview that we're doing now airs, that interview with Echo Bodine will be live. So, Rafael, unfortunately, you can't access it yet because it hasn't been published quite yet. But Echo wrote a book that has been a real game changer for me. It's called A Still Small Voice, The Psychic's Guide to Awakening Intuition. It's incredible. We're all psychic, and we just shut that out because we don't believe it. The old expression, seeing is more believing is seeing. What you believe is what you see, what you create out of this reality.
What is your take on, I guess I'll ask you because I have my own, along those lines on psychedelics. Have you had any guests that's their area of expertise?
Yeah, I have had some guests on that topic, very strong proponents of it. I've never done any psychedelics myself, but one example of a guest in that area is Dennis Naughton. And yeah, he even is a proponent of microdosing ayahuasca, which I'd never heard of before. I mean, I had heard of ayahuasca doing a ceremony and having a shaman, but to microdose it on a daily basis to the point where you don't really actively feel it, but it's working kind of in the background, I thought was pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I have made a decision to actually try this year. I've never done any kind of drugs of any kind, but the research that's being done by the experts out there is just so interesting, right? And so overwhelming. And then the parallels, right? When you look at like when they explore or they monitor like expert or power meditators, right? Like these monks that go into the mountains, and they do their thing, and then they take, the effects of psilocybin, for example, right? And then they see how their bodies are reacting to it, and then they interview them and talk to them afterwards, and the similarities are just too much to ignore, right? And so I made a decision that this year I'm going to find a place that is reputable where I can be watched because you want to be in a safe place, so to with professionals who know what they're doing, and what kind of experience that brings.
There's a very famous place in Costa Rica called Rhythmia. You could go there. I had Corinne Grillo on this podcast, and she's psychic and works with angels and so forth. And we actually had a conversation, not on the podcast, but separately. I was curious to hear her take on plant medicines and so forth. And she said that it's much better to do it in a very small, intimate group, maybe just you and your partner, or even alone with the shaman, rather than a group of people, because you're going to be so open that you might take on inadvertently some other people's energies that it doesn't really serve you. So best to not be in a group of strangers who have all sorts of differing backgrounds and belief systems and so forth, so that you're not absorbing that when you're doing your own journey.
Good point. Yeah, I definitely would do it alone.
Yeah. So if that intrigues you and you want to talk to Corinne, I can certainly put you in contact with her, and maybe her podcast interview first to see if she resonates with you, and then you can contact her and see if she'll be the one that's a fit to take you on that journey.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I would definitely look into that.
Yeah, awesome. So I want to read something short to you, and I want to get your take on it. It's been profound for me. I've been reading it ever since I got this, which it's a one-page sheet. I got it from Dr. Kirby Hotchner, who was a guest on this podcast, and it just really encapsulates this human experience in a way that's very deep. So I'll read it to you, and then I want to hear what you have to say about it. It is only knowing the truth that will set you free. And the truth is that I is your true identity, and at the center of your being, that I is God, infinite individuality, and your only reality. This has to be fully accepted and rooted in your consciousness by daily practice and opening to this I of your being to receive its grace. Also, and equally important, is that everything else you perceive and experience, whether it enters your mind consciously or unconsciously, is a universal mesmerism formed by the world's belief in two powers, good and evil. This occurs from the time of conception, so everything you are told, hear, see, and all that arrives from all the thoughts of the world floods into the mind daily from all those that have ever existed. Universal beliefs like birth, death, disease, evil, poverty, aging, etc. The I that you are is eternal, unchanging, immortal, and is your and everyone else's soul, mind, consciousness, self, life, and the substance of all form. It is God, manifesting as individual self infinitely. As we meditate on this daily, accept it, practice it, and live it, it will eventually become our realized awakened state of consciousness, and that will dissolve all sense of separation from God and all the universal hypnotic appearances of the world's beliefs that are constantly bombarding your mind.
Well, there's a lot there. Very interesting. I think I struggle a little bit with the concept of I. I'm reading a number of books that are on both sides of that fence of, do we have a self, or is the self an illusion also as part of the illusion, right? So I haven't made up my mind on, sometimes I think, concept of self is an illusion. And then sometimes I'm like, well, no, it's not. So there's a lot there that I can agree with, which is, if you're in the right point of observation, then all you see is unity, right? Which is, that's that we are all, one, right? We're all part of the same thing that is observing itself through us, right? Call it God, universe, or whatever the case may be. It's interesting that the author of that sees that, but uses I very, very forcefully as an individual, right?
Well, here's what I think he's referring to. And the author of this is Joel Goldsmith. So my understanding of what he's referring to by the I is the biblical term I am. The I am is God. Like it goes beyond personality and all the illusion to the infinite. So that's my understanding of it as the I am. If you've heard of that term in the biblical sense, I'm pretty sure what he's referring to.
So then, in that sense, I is everything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's anything that you could describe with adjectives is almost it's like irrelevant because it's so much deeper than that. It is everything. It is everything and nothing. It's indescribable. It is beyond comprehension.
It's just like, the Tao Te Ching, right? The Tao that can be named is not the Tao, right? I'm not I used to be very religious. I'm no longer a religious person. I'm more of a spiritual person. So the concept of God to me is a very, very useful tool that is created in our minds in order to be able to explain the unexplainable, right?
So let me ask you that then. If God to you is more of a concept, a useful kind of framework, then do you have experiences or personal relationship with God where you can kind of hear his voice or experience his unconditional love, or is it more kind of esoteric knowledge and not really that personal relationship or experience?
No, it is. It is. I do have, a personal relationship. It's just not in feelings and passion and, about living and how that permeates, the other parts of my life. I just don't see it in the structure of the various religions that, have, mankind has created over time. To me, I think, to go back to what you read, Dr. Wayne Dyer, I don't know if that name rings a bell, but, I was a very big fan of his. Still, he passed away, but he had a way of explaining things that was just like, it just clicked, right? Is when we talk about the I, once you explained it, it reminded me immediately of what Dyer talking about the ocean, right? And he had an example. It's like if you go to the beach and you see the ocean and it's in all its power and all its majesty, right? I mean, it's a force. It's powerful and it gives life, right? It gave life to us. We all come from the ocean, etc. If I go to the beach and I take a glass and I take water from the ocean into that glass and then I bring it home and I sit it on the counter, is that the ocean? Well, chemically speaking, yes, you got all the compounds and everything, it's got salt and it's got all the minerals and everything that's in the ocean, but it's not the ocean because it's been removed from it and now it doesn't have any other power. It doesn't have any waves. It doesn't have any other life-giving capabilities, right? It's been separated from it. And the moment you take it back and you dump it back into the ocean, it regains all the properties, life-giving and power and strength, etc., etc., etc. So I resonate with the idea of the I, the way you described it, the I as the undescribable I, right? Everything, but also nothing and anything in between. Because I think that is where we can truly see through all lenses. That is where our brains no longer dictate that model of reality, right? Because that model of reality is limited. We know that because it's limited by our flesh. It's limited by how our brains are wired, right? The reality I see is different than yours because we have different backgrounds, right? But when you transcend beyond that, then all you see is everything and nothing all at once. I think, if I may, that is the main reason why I'm no longer like an institutional religious person, because, a religion to me, had to have a religion has to have four elements. One of them is the propagation, the ability to propagate. A process that people get taught so that it lasts time. It has to have a set of rules because we needed them because people back then were killing each other senselessly. Not that we're not now, but I think we're a lot better today than we were 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. It has to have explanations for why the world is the way it is. Where are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? But it has one more element, which is in my mind the most important one, and it has to teach how to transcend. It's to how to go from where we are and what we see and what we touch and what we feel to that place of what you described as the I,
Mm-hmm.
right? As the everything.
Yeah. Well, one thing I've learned, because I had very similar perspective about spiritual. I'm spiritual, not religious, and so forth. And not that I would say I'm religious now, but I'm much more respectful and appreciative of the gifts that are inside of the various religions, the wisdom and the tools and the insight. For example, in the book of Isaiah 6:8, Isaiah is at the feet of God and he's saying, "Here I am, Lord, please send me." And I use that on a regular basis, imagining myself at the feet of God, volunteering to deliver his miracles. And then the most amazing, seemingly unbelievable, if you're a materialist, things come to pass, like 1 in a trillion chance type situations where I get to deliver God's miracle makes a life-changing difference for the person. So that's an incredible gift that I was never really a big Bible reader or anything, but that just little piece from the book of Isaiah has changed my life.
I know, and I'm 100% in agreement with you. I find beauty, truth, and wisdom all the time in the various types of scriptures, whether it's the Bible or in Hinduism and Buddhism and so forth. There is beauty, truth, and wisdom in all. So I can appreciate the potential effect that it can have on people, right? And that potential effect, the positive potential effect that it can have on people. And I also, like you, I have excerpts of the Bible specifically that are in my mind. And one of them is in the New Testament when Jesus says, "Be in the world, but not of it." And to me, that is the example. I mean, that is right there. That's why I meditate. That's why I do what I do, right? Because I don't believe, right? I've met, in the past 5 years that I've embarked in this journey, 6 years that I've been back in this journey of self-discovery, self-scrutiny, self-evaluation, um, self-observation. I've met a variety of people that have different walks of life, but that they're all trying to converge into that, becoming more aware, becoming more conscious, being less reactive. And I've met some folks that their answer to what's happening inside them and what's happening outside of them is I'm gonna sell everything. I'm gonna go to Bali and live there and then just chant on the beach and dance around, and eat, wonderful food and just completely disconnect from the world. And great, but that's not me. I can't do that. I am a social being, or I'm not the guy that's gonna go to a top of a mountain, like these monks and just stay there, and not talk to anybody. I mean, more power to them. There is a purpose in doing that. That's great, but I need to be in the world.
Yeah, we live in a world of action.
Exactly.
And if you're just observing without manifesting any of your creativity and your benevolence, you're kind of missing the point, I think.
I agree. And again, I don't criticize, if that's what people need, then that's great. But I need to be able to scrutinize myself. I need to be able to evaluate myself. I need to be able to wake up every day, just like you said in the intro, to unlearn, relearn, and learn the new, right? And then take that and use it, and hopefully inspire other people to do not the same, but to find their way, right? To find their path, to find their approach to being less unconscious, and less unaware. Because that's the more aware we become, then the more that unity manifests itself, right? The more that I that you described becomes evident, self-evident to more people around, and then that's how we get beautiful things done.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of the I, or the I am, to contrast that with the egoic I learned this from Gary Ning. Yeah, I think they pronounce it Ning, NG. I met him through Tony Robbins' Platinum Partnership. He says there are 3 types of self. There's the egoic self, there's the observer self, and then there's the higher self. It helps me to kind of put things in perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely, and I try to keep that in my mind, especially when bad things happen, right? Bad things happen. Something happens. Somebody mistreats you or mistreats you in your eyes, right? It's like, well, what part of me is reacting to this stimulus? Am I under attack? Am I in danger? Am I, any of the primal things? No, 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 no. Then why is my heart rate going up? Right? Why am I getting flushed, in the face? These are all responses, psychosomatic, biological responses to being under physical attack. But I'm not. So breathe, slow down, and take it for what it is. This person who's doing something to you, they have a reality that is just not in agreement with yours, right? They have something going on electrically in the brain, in their brain, and that has nothing to do with you. And that is why, this is precisely why I meditate, is to be able to do that in real time without losing it, right?
Another way to look at it is that if this person is in my movie, my simulation, my illusion, there must be a purpose. There must be a reason. Like I'm I'm on Earth school to learn something and to grow and evolve. Why is this person in my movie right now? And I love that question. Such a powerful question. Anytime somebody cuts you off on the freeway or says an unkind word or does something totally bizarre that might trigger you, why is this in my movie?
Yeah, I had a mentor a long time ago. Wonderful man. He died way too young. He was a priest who had happened to be a student of my mother when he was in high school, and then he ended up again by some sort of pattern to become the priest at our parish. Where we lived in Panama. I'm from Panama originally, and we became good friends. And he, at the time, he taught me, he trained me so that I could teach catechism. So I can, I was young. I was like 17, 18 years old, but he wanted me to work with young people. As a young person myself, to work with the young people. He used to say, when God wants to get your attention, he'll throw a leaf in your head, so that you stop what you're doing and, pay attention, and if you don't pay attention, then he throws a small pebble. And then if you don't pay attention, then he throws a little bit bigger rock. If you don't pay attention, he'll throw you a brick. And then eventually it's a boulder. And then at some point, you're like, well, why is all this happening? He said, well, you're not paying attention. You know, you need to pay attention. Turn around. You're going the wrong way. Go in this direction. I've been trying to get your attention. Until the lesson is learned, you're still repeating the grade, right? You stay in fifth grade until you pass. Then you go to sixth grade, right? And then if you're unwilling to learn sixth grade, you're going to stay in sixth grade. And you can stay. Some people stay in sixth grade their entire lives, right?
Or even multiple lifetimes.
Even in multiple lifetimes, right? So the idea is to I tell this, to my kids sometimes. They're young and they're living their lives, and I love them and I'm proud of them, but they don't like when I get into my rants and start talking about these types of things, which I understand. You have to go through this process, right? And when you find yourself asking, why is this happening to me? Pay attention to that question. Like really, really pay attention to who's asking the question and why. Because the answer will be self-evident. The reason this is happening to me is because there's something I was supposed to learn from this that I haven't learned. And until I learn it, it's going to continue to happen. It's like relationships. You see people, they walk into a relationship, with a person, and then things go wrong, and then they go date somebody else, and which is a different version of the exact same person they were before. And then they go to the next person, and when you look at all of them, it's like, well, it's really the same person, right? They're just in different bodies. Well, you obviously didn't learn the lesson. There's something to be learned there through observation, so that the next person you find doesn't have the same characteristics that clash with you, right? And again, that is this, we keep coming back to it, and I think it's a beautiful thing that no matter, we've gone in different directions in this conversation, but it goes back to that process of self-observation, right? And that process of what tools can I use to be a better observer of myself, my inner self, and what's happening around me.
Yep. And speaking of inner self, that's where infinity is. Not, I mean, science will tell you it's out there in space. It goes on forever and there are trillions of stars and so forth. But infinity, when you realize that, hey, this is an illusion, this whole thing's an illusion, then the true infinity is inside. It's within you. And that's where you can go infinitely and get lost in a good way in the present moment.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I have a phrase that I tell my kids is go observe the world outside of you and then observe the universe within. Because what's in it, it's far greater than anything you can perceive with the senses, right? Um, so yeah, we're definitely in alignment there.
Yeah, awesome. Well, this has been a really fun conversation and inspiring, I'm sure, for our listener. If our listener wants to work with you and get to that place of expanding their consciousness, improving their health, making a bigger difference in the world, feeling and living better, how do they get in touch? How do they work with you?
Yeah, they can go to my website at conarium.com. Conarium, CONARIUM.com. Conarium is there's I have my email there and my podcast is there. I started a new podcast since we met. I started a new podcast. You can find me there. There's an email where you can send me an email and we can talk. By the way, Conarium, I think you would appreciate this, but the word Conarium is actually a Latin for pine cone. And the pine cone, when I was looking for a name for a company, I wanted something that was scientifically sound, but also filled with ancient wisdom. And the pine cone is the element of the pineal gland, right, which has plenty of ancient wisdom and religious and spiritual connotations, right? But it also is part of the endocrine system. It's a key element in our well-being. Regulates melatonin, and other hormones. So I found that to be a beautiful bridge between where I want to live. I want to live in the beautiful overlap of ancient wisdom and modern science, right? And then use that. So yes, you can find me at conarium.com. I'm happy to connect.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Rafael. And thank you, listener. Go out there and reveal some light in the world, improve your own vessel, your own health and wellness and happiness. And we'll catch you on the next episode. In the meantime, have a fantastic week. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.